4-year-old beggar girl used as bait by thieves on a highway. But a millionaire in a luxury car, seeing this, did something shocking. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The afternoon sun sliced through the I-80 highway in Pennsylvania like a golden blade, but Richard Huntington didn't even notice the beauty of the Pocono Mountains. At 52, the businessman drove his silver Mercedes-Benz with the same methodical precision he applied to his chain of hardware stores. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel, mentally tracking the month's sales figures, when a scene ahead made him slam on the brakes. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, was being pushed into the middle of the road by 2 men hiding behind the bushes on the roadside. Her clothes were dirty, her tangled hair whipping in the wind, and even from a distance, Richard could see the terror etched on her small face. It was an obvious trap, using the child as bait to stop vehicles and rob them. The businessman felt an old fury ignite in his chest. Throughout his life, he had built his reputation on absolute control of situations, on meticulous planning of every move. Seeing a child used in that way violated every principle of justice he had held since he was young. Without hesitating, Richard pulled the car onto the shoulder and got out, completely ignoring the risks. His imposing figure, wearing a dark suit even in the afternoon heat, advanced towards the criminals with a determination that made the 2 men recoil instinctively. "Let the girl go now," he shouted, his voice echoing across the empty highway. The thugs, clearly not expecting such a direct reaction, released the child and fled into the woods, leaving behind only the echo of breaking branches and the girl trembling on the hot asphalt. Richard approached slowly, his hands extended in a pacifying gesture. "It's okay, sweetie. They're gone," he said, crouching down to her level. "What's your name?" "Ashley," the girl whispered, wiping away tears with her dirty hands. "They said if I didn't stay on the road, they'd hurt my mum." Richard's heart clenched. The child had the most intelligent eyes he had ever seen, a disturbing clarity that contrasted with her neglected appearance. Something in that look painfully reminded him of his own daughter, Brittany, now 25, and not speaking to him for 5 years. "Where's your mom?" he asked, looking around. Ashley pointed to a narrow path that descended the slope. "Down there. She's sick today. The men said if I got money, they could buy her medicine." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. He knew that kind of sickness well. He had seen the signs in his own family. Without saying anything else, he took Ashley's hand and descended the steep path, finding a makeshift camp under a concrete bridge. Deborah Santana, 28, was lying on damp cardboard, shivering violently. Even in her deplorable state, it was clear that she had once been a beautiful woman. Now, however, her hair was dull, her face too thin, and the smell of cheap liquor permeated the entire area. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to sit up when she saw the stranger in a suit approaching with her daughter. "Someone who wants to help," Richard replied simply. "Your daughter was being used as bait for robberies on the highway." The horror that spread across Deborah's face was genuine. "No, I never—" "They said they just wanted her to beg. Mommy, the man saved me," Ashley said, running to hug Deborah. "He scared away the bad men." Richard watched the interaction between mother and daughter, seeing both love and despair in Deborah's gestures. It was a complex situation, and his analytical mind was already formulating a solution. He had a small vacant apartment in Scranton, a property he had bought as an investment but never rented out. "You 2 are coming with me," he said, surprising himself with the sudden decision. "I have a place where you can stay." Deborah stared at him suspiciously, hugging Ashley tighter. "Why? What do you want in return?" The question cut deep. What did he want? Richard wasn't sure, but something in the situation echoed an old pain in his chest. Maybe it was a chance to do something right, after so many mistakes as a father. "Nothing," he lied, knowing that his motivations were more complicated than that. "Just let me help." Silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of distant traffic passing over the bridge. Ashley looked from one to the other, her intelligent eyes capturing nuances that a 6-year-old shouldn't understand. Finally, Deborah nodded, driven more by despair than trust. Richard helped the two of them up the path, carrying the few belongings they possessed in a torn bag. When they reached the Mercedes, Ashley hesitantly touched the shiny metal. "Is this really yours?" she asked. "It is," Richard replied, opening the back door for her. During the drive to Scranton, he watched in the rearview mirror as Ashley looked out the window, fascinated, making intelligent comments about the buildings they passed. The girl had a sharp mind, that was obvious. Deborah remained silent for most of the time, only occasionally whispering answers to her daughter's questions. Richard could feel the weight of shame emanating from her, mixed with a palpable fear that this was just a cruel dream. When they arrived at the small furnished apartment, Ashley explored every room with curiosity, while Deborah stayed close to the door, as if ready to flee at any moment. The place was simple but clean, with 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a basic kitchen. "You can stay as long as you need," Richard said, placing the keys on the table. "Tomorrow we'll take care of practical matters. School for Ashley, treatment for you." "I'm not an addict," Deborah protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Richard just nodded, not wanting to force an argument at that moment. He had learned through years of managing employees that some truths needed to be discovered by the person themselves. As he prepared to leave, Ashley ran to him and held his hand. "Thank you for saving us," she said, with a disconcerting seriousness for her age. At that moment, looking into those intelligent and determined eyes, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of doing something truly important. But he also felt a familiar ache in his chest, the same pain he had carried since Brittany stopped talking to him. Maybe this was his chance for redemption, or maybe he was just creating a new way to fail. Time would tell which of the 2 options would prove true. But at that moment, for the first time in years, Richard Huntington felt he had a purpose greater than building his fortune. 3 weeks had passed since Richard had brought Deborah and Ashley to the apartment in Scranton. During this period, he had established a meticulous routine that reflected his controlling personality. He visited them every morning before work, checked that they had everything they needed, and returned in the late afternoon to have dinner with them. Ashley had adapted with impressive ease. The girl woke up early, made her own bed with military precision, and helped her mother with household chores. But what most caught Richard's attention was her extraordinary ability with numbers. During a dull afternoon, she had spontaneously organized the house bills by due date, mentally calculating the total amounts. "How did you learn to do that?" he asked, impressed by the ease with which she manipulated 3-digit numbers. "I don't know," Ashley replied, shrugging her shoulders. "Numbers make sense in my head. It's like they're talking to me." That answer brought a painful pang to Richard's chest. Brittany had also shown precocious talent for math, before the constant conflicts between them destroyed any possibility of dialogue. His daughter had graduated in psychology, specializing in the care of children at risk, a choice he had always interpreted as a silent judgment of his failures as a father. Deborah, on the other hand, struggled daily against her internal demons. Richard had arranged for her to attend a support group for addicts 3 times a week, but he perceived her resistance in every reluctant gesture. She accepted the help with gratitude mixed with shame, always maintaining a respectful distance that made it clear that she did not feel worthy of such generosity. "Why are you doing this for us?" she asked one afternoon while they were preparing dinner together. Richard had paused in the middle of cutting vegetables, the question echoing questions he himself could not fully answer. "Because you need it," he replied, avoiding delving into the matter. But the truth was more complex. With each passing day observing Ashley, he saw reflections of Brittany in childhood, and this fueled both his motivation and his guilt. Was he genuinely helping, or just trying to compensate for years of emotional absence with his own daughter? The answer to this question came unexpectedly on a Thursday afternoon. Richard was helping Ashley with math exercises when she made an observation that chilled him to the bone. "You know," she said, counting on her fingers while solving a multiplication problem, "Deborah isn't my real mom." The words came out naturally, as if she were commenting on the weather. Richard dropped the pencil he was holding, feeling the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Ashley continued drawing numbers in her notebook, apparently unaware of the impact of her revelation. "I remember before, a different house, with a lady who gave me warm baths and told me stories. Deborah found me when I was lost and crying. She was crying too." Richard's heart was beating so hard he could hear it. "Ashley, are you sure about this?" "I am. But I don't talk about it because Deborah gets very sad when I remember things from before. She says we're a family now, and families don't leave each other." At that moment, Deborah entered the room, carrying a tray of homemade cookies. Seeing the expression on Richard's face, she stopped immediately, her smile disappearing. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tense. Richard looked at Ashley, who remained focused on her numbers, seemingly oblivious to the storm she had just unleashed. "We need to talk," he said softly to Deborah. They waited until Ashley fell asleep to have the conversation that would change everything. Sitting in the small kitchen, under the dim light of the yellowish lamp, Deborah finally told the truth she had kept for so long. "I had a daughter," she began, her hands trembling slightly. "Mariana. She was 4 years old when the accident happened." Richard remained silent, allowing her to find her own words at her own pace. "It was my fault," Deborah continued, tears beginning to flow. "I was drinking. I shouldn't have been taking care of her alone. Mariana fell down the stairs, hit her head. When we got to the hospital, it was too late." The pain in her voice was palpable, years of guilt concentrated in every word. "Social workers wanted to commit me, said I wasn't fit. I ran. I spent months on the streets drinking to forget." "And Ashley?" Richard asked gently. "I found her at a fair in Scranton 2 years ago. She was lost, crying, looking for someone named Grandma Connie. She was hungry, scared. I looked for people who might be looking for her, but no one showed up." Deborah paused, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand. "At first I thought about taking her to the authorities, but she was so small, so scared, and I needed someone to take care of. When she started calling me Mom, I couldn't correct her." "You know this is kidnapping," Richard said, but his voice carried no judgment, only concern. "I know," Deborah whispered. "But look at her. Look how well cared for she is now. I love her as if she were my own flesh and blood. I would give my life for her." Richard believed it. During the weeks of living together, he had witnessed the genuine love between the two, even knowing now that it was built on a complex lie. But he also understood the devastating implications of that revelation. "Some family may have been looking for her for 2 years, he said. "I think about it every day," Deborah admitted. "But what if the family looking for her is worse than the situation she was in? What if she was deliberately abandoned?" The questions echoed in the silence of the kitchen. Richard found himself confronted with a moral dilemma that challenged all his principles of justice and control. He had spent his life making decisions based on concrete facts and clear rules, but this situation existed in a gray area where there were no easy answers. "I need to think about this," he said finally. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He walked through the rooms of his empty house, a mansion he had bought to impress, but which had never truly felt like a home. He thought about Brittany, about how his need to control every aspect of her life had destroyed their relationship. He thought about Ashley, a bright child who deserved stability. And he thought about Deborah, a broken woman trying to rebuild her life on the fragments of a tragedy. For the first time in years, Richard Huntington felt completely lost, without a clear plan to follow. And that feeling of uncertainty was both terrifying and strangely liberating. The next morning, when he arrived at the apartment for the usual breakfast, he found a scene that made his heart ache. Ashley was teaching Deborah how to solve basic math problems, the two of them sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by scribbled papers. "Look, Richard!" Ashley shouted excitedly. "I'm teaching Mommy to do calculations like you taught me." At that moment, seeing the genuine smile on Deborah's face and Ashley's innocent joy, Richard understood that some situations couldn't be solved with business logic. Some decisions had to be made with the heart, even if it meant entering unfamiliar territory. But before he could fully process this realization, the doorbell rang, interrupting the moment of domestic peace with an urgency that made all three of them exchange apprehensive glances. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Richard felt a pit in his stomach, as if his instinct were warning him of something that would change everything. Deborah visibly paled, instinctively pulling Ashley closer. "I'll get it," Richard said, walking to the door with hesitant steps. When he opened it, he found a young woman with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a blue blouse. She had dark eyes that seemed familiar, a confident posture that he immediately recognized. His heart stopped for a moment. "Brittany," he whispered, barely able to believe what he saw. "Hi, Dad," she replied, her voice laden with a complex mixture of nervousness and determination. "Can I come in?" Richard stood paralyzed in the doorway. For 5 years he had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was happening, he felt completely unprepared, especially with Deborah and Ashley there. Sure, he stammered, stepping aside to let her pass. Brittany entered and immediately noticed the presence of the two women in the room. Her trained psychologist eyes quickly captured the details. A clearly intelligent girl hiding behind a woman showing obvious signs of recovery from substance abuse. "Who are they?" Brittany asked directly, without beating around the bush. Richard felt a cold sweat run down his back. How to explain a situation that he himself did not yet fully understand? "This is Deborah and her daughter Ashley. They are going through some difficulties." "Difficulties?" Brittany repeated, her professional tone emerging. "Dad, are you housing strangers in your apartment?" Ashley let go of Deborah's hand and walked up to Brittany with the natural curiosity of children. "Are you Richard's daughter?" she asked, tilting her head to the side. "You have the same eyes." The simple observation broke some of the tension. Brittany couldn't help but smile slightly at the girl's sincerity. "I am, and you must be very clever to notice that." "I'm good with details," Ashley replied proudly. "And with numbers, too. Want to see?" Before anyone could intervene, Ashley ran to the table and returned with her exercise books, excitedly showing Brittany the complex calculations she had solved. The psychologist examined the material with growing interest, her expression changing from surprise to professional fascination. "This is third-grade work," Brittany murmured. "How old are you?" 6. "But Richard says my head is older than my body," Ashley replied, making Brittany look at her father with an unreadable expression. Deborah, who had remained silent observing the interaction, finally approached. "Brittany, isn't it? Your father talks about you a lot." "He does," Brittany said, surprised, looking back at Richard. "Every day," Deborah confirmed. "He gets very sad when he says that you haven't spoken to each other in a long time." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions. Richard felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Brittany processed the information, trying to understand the strange dynamic she had encountered. "Can I talk to you in private, Dad?" Brittany asked finally. They went out to the small balcony of the apartment, leaving Deborah and Ashley in the living room. The mountain air was fresh, but the tension between father and daughter warmed the atmosphere. 5 years, Brittany began, leaning on the railing. 5 years without a word. And I find you playing savior to strangers? They're not strangers, Richard defended. Ashley is an exceptional child who was being exploited, and Deborah is a recovering addict, Brittany completed with professional frankness. Dad, do you have any idea what you're doing? This situation could be extremely dangerous. Richard felt the familiar irritation rise. This was exactly how his discussions with Brittany always began. Her questioning his decisions, him defending himself, both escalating until they reached the breaking point. But this time, something different happened. Instead of exploding, he stopped and took a deep breath. "You're right," he said, surprising both of them. "I don't know what I'm doing. But for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something important." The sincerity in his voice made Brittany pause. During her childhood, her father had been an authoritarian figure, always sure of everything, never admitting faults or uncertainties. Hearing this vulnerability was disconcerting. "Why did you come here today?" Richard asked. Brittany hesitated, struggling with her own emotions. "Because I found out that Mom lied to me during all these years." Richard's world seemed to tremble. "What do you mean?" "Miriam intercepted your letters, changed the phone number without telling me. For 5 years, she made me believe that you didn't want to talk to me when in fact you were trying all the time." The revelation hit Richard like a punch. All those letters he had sent that came back, all the calls that didn't go through, all the nights he had spent wondering if Brittany really hated him so much. "How did you find out?" he managed to ask. "I found the letters hidden in the attic when I was helping her move to the new apartment. 5 years of letters, Dad. 5 years of you trying to apologize, trying to explain, trying to convince me to talk to you." Tears began to run down Brittany's face. "I spent all these years angry at you, thinking you had simply given up on me after that fight." Richard approached hesitantly, wanting to hug his daughter, but not knowing if he would be welcome. "Brittany, You were trying to protect me back then," she interrupted. "I was too young to understand that your strict rules came from the fear of seeing me suffer, but the way you did it was suffocating." "I know," he admitted. "And looking now at Ashley, I see how much I messed up with you. A child needs guidance, not control." Father and daughter were silent for a few minutes, processing years of misunderstandings and hurts. Through the window they could see Deborah helping Ashley pack her school supplies, the domestic scene contrasting with the emotional intensity of the balcony. "That girl," Brittany said finally, "is she really Deborah's daughter?" Richard closed his eyes. Another complication in an already impossible situation. "It's a long story." "I have time," Brittany replied, and for the first time in 5 years, her tone carried no judgment, only genuine interest. Richard told everything: the rescue on the highway, the coexistence of the last few weeks, and especially Deborah's revelation the night before. Brittany listened in silence, her analytical mind processing the legal and emotional implications of the situation. "Dad, this is very serious," she said when he finished. "If Ashley was really kidnapped, there's a family somewhere that may be desperately looking for her." "I know," Richard replied, "but I also know that Deborah genuinely loves her, and Ashley is happy with her." "That doesn't change the fact that it's illegal," Brittany said, but her voice was gentle. "And as a psychologist specializing in children at risk, I have an ethical obligation to report this." Richard's blood ran cold. He was losing his daughter again at the exact moment he had recovered her, and this time it would be his own fault. "But," Brittany continued, "before making any decision, I need to better understand the situation. Can I spend a few weeks here? Observe, evaluate what is really best for Ashley." The proposal was unexpected and complicated things even further, but Richard nodded. Any extra time with Brittany was a gift, even if it came with uncertain consequences. When they returned to the living room, they found Ashley drawing while Deborah prepared lunch. The girl had made a drawing of 4 figures holding hands, clearly representing the new family dynamic that was forming. "I drew all of us together," she said excitedly to Brittany. "Now we're a big family." Brittany looked at the drawing, then at her father, then at Deborah, who watched nervously from the kitchen. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming, but there was something in Ashley's innocence that touched a sensitive chord in her professional heart. "This is going to be interesting," she murmured to herself, not knowing that she had just committed herself to the most complicated situation of her career. 2 weeks had passed since Brittany's unexpected arrival, and the dynamics of the small apartment had changed completely. The psychologist had settled on the sofa bed in the living room, transforming the space into an improvised office where she discreetly observed the interactions between Deborah and Ashley. During this period, Brittany had witnessed moments that challenged her professional expectations. Deborah showed a genuine and intuitive care for Ashley, anticipating her needs, comforting her when she had nightmares, and above all staying sober with an unwavering determination that impressed even someone used to working with substance abuse. "She hasn't drunk for 43 days, Brittany commented one morning while walking with her father through the streets of Scranton. "That's significant for someone at the stage she was at." Richard nodded, but his mind was troubled by other worries. During the previous night, he had noticed Deborah crying silently in the kitchen while looking at a yellowed photo that she had quickly hidden when he appeared. The image of her lost daughter, no doubt. "Brittany," he said hesitantly, "as a psychologist, do you think Deborah can really overcome the trauma of losing her daughter?" The question made Brittany stop in the middle of the sidewalk. In recent days, she had observed subtle signs that confirmed her professional suspicions. Deborah treated Ashley with a desperate love, as if the girl were a lifeline against an ocean of guilt and pain. "It's possible," she replied carefully, "but she needs specialized professional help. And above all, she needs to confront the truth about what she did." At that moment, they were interrupted by a middle-aged woman who was approaching with haste. She wore a grey business suit and carried a black briefcase, her serious expression contrasting with the relaxed atmosphere of the mountain town. "Mr. Richard Huntington?" she asked, extending an official identification. "I'm Valerie Sanders, a social worker from the municipality. I need to talk to you about a situation that has come to our attention." Richard's blood ran cold. Beside him, Brittany tensed, immediately recognizing the implications of that unexpected visit. "What is it about?" Richard asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "We received an anonymous report about a child in an irregular situation living in one of your properties. A girl of approximately 6 years old, without adequate school documentation, under the care of a woman with a history of substance abuse." Brittany and Richard exchanged a quick glance. Someone had discovered the situation and decided to act. But who? And why? "May I accompany you for a verification visit?" Valerie continued, but her tone made it clear that it wasn't really a question. During the way back to the apartment, Richard felt the panic growing in his chest. His whole life had been built on control and predictability, but now he found himself completely at the mercy of forces he couldn't manipulate. Brittany walked beside him in silence, clearly processing the legal implications of the situation. When they arrived at the building, they found Deborah and Ashley in the small inner garden, the girl helping to water the plants while excitedly talking about a book she had read. The domestic and harmonious scene contrasted painfully with the gravity of the moment. "Deborah," Richard called carefully, "this is Valerie Sanders, a social worker. She needs to ask some questions." Deborah's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her face paled completely, and instinctively she pulled Ashley closer, like an animal protecting her young. Ashley, realizing the tension of the adults, clung tightly to Deborah's hand. "What's happening?" the girl asked, her intelligent eyes capturing that something was very wrong. Valerie crouched down to Ashley's level, her professional training emerging. "Hi, honey. I'm Valerie. I work helping children and families. Can I ask you a few questions? Ashley looked at Deborah, who nodded tremulously, then at Richard, who tried to convey tranquility through his gaze. You can, she replied finally, but her voice was lower than normal. Do you like living here? Valerie asked gently. I like it a lot. Deborah takes good care of me, and Richard teaches me math, Ashley replied. But her eyes continued to alternate nervously between the adults. And do you remember living somewhere else before here? The question made Ashley hesitate. Richard felt his heart race, knowing that the girl's answer could change everything. Deborah held her breath, her fingers involuntarily squeezing the small hand. I lived in different places, Ashley said carefully, but now I live here with my family. Valerie made notes on her clipboard, her next questions becoming more specific and disturbing. She questioned about birth certificates, school records, medical records, all the bureaucratic aspects that exposed the irregularity of the situation. Mrs. Santana, she said finally, addressing the woman who was visibly trembling, can you present Ashley's birth certificate? We lost everything when we were on the streets, Deborah stammered, but I can provide a duplicate. It was an obvious lie, and everyone there knew it. Valerie made more notes, her expression becoming progressively more serious. I'm going to need to take Ashley for a complete evaluation, she announced. It's standard procedure in cases like this. No! Deborah screamed instinctively, hugging Ashley tightly. She's not going anywhere! The desperate reaction confirmed all of Valerie's suspicions. Ashley began to cry, frightened by the emotional intensity of the adults around her. Mrs. Santana, I need you to calm down, Valerie said firmly. If you cooperate, this will be easier for everyone, especially for the child. It was at this moment that Brittany decided to intervene. Valerie, I'm a psychologist specializing in children at risk. I can attest that Ashley is well cared for and emotionally stable. Perhaps we can discuss alternatives to immediate removal. Valerie looked at Brittany with interest. Are you licensed with the board? Can you provide an official assessment? I can, Brittany confirmed, and I suggest that any decision be made based on the best interest of the child, not just bureaucratic issues. What followed was a tense negotiation that lasted over an hour. Valerie, pressured by Brittany's professional expertise and the intervention of Richard, whose name carried weight in the local community, agreed to give a deadline of 2 weeks to regularize the situation. But I want to make it clear, she said before leaving, that if there is no significant progress, Ashley will be placed in temporary foster care while we investigate her true origin. After the social worker left, the apartment was plunged into a heavy silence. Ashley had shrunk into the sofa, clearly traumatized by the experience. Deborah cried silently, knowing that her carefully constructed world was crumbling. 2 weeks, Richard murmured. How are we going to solve this in 2 weeks? Brittany sat next to Ashley, offering professional comfort mixed with genuine affection that she had developed for the girl. First, we need to be honest about everything. No more lies. If I tell the truth, they'll take her away, Deborah said desperately. If you don't tell them, they'll find out anyway, Brittany replied. And then it will be worse for everyone, especially for Ashley. That night, after Ashley fell asleep, exhausted from the emotional stress of the day, the 3 adults gathered in the kitchen for a conversation that none of them wanted to have. I need to know everything, Brittany said. Every detail about how you found Ashley, where, when, everything she said about her previous life. Deborah began to speak, her voice choked with emotion. She described the day at the Scranton Fair when she found Ashley lost, crying and looking for someone named Grandma Connie. The girl was wearing a blue dress with flowers, carrying a small rag doll, and talking about a house with lots of flowers and a grandpa who made kites. Did she mention anything else? Brittany pressed. She talked about fishing with her grandpa and about a school where they taught music, but when I asked where it was, she couldn't explain. Richard absorbed every detail, his analytical mind already working to connect the information. If Ashley really had a family looking for her, there were enough clues to start a search. But while they planned investigative strategies, none of them realized that outside the building, a figure was watching the illuminated windows of the apartment. Someone who had made the anonymous report and was now waiting to see how the events would unfold, with motivations that went far beyond concern for the well-being of a child. The following days became a race against time. Brittany had used her professional contacts to initiate a discreet search for families who had reported the disappearance of children in the Pocono area in the last 2 years. Richard mobilized financial resources to hire a private investigator, while Deborah struggled with anxiety attacks that left her prostrate for hours. Ashley, meanwhile, perceived the growing tension but did not fully understand its causes. The girl had become quieter, her spontaneous smiles less frequent, and her drawings began to show isolated figures instead of the happy families she used to portray. On the morning of the 5th day after Valerie's visit, Brittany received a call that would change everything. On the other end of the line, a male voice laden with hope and despair asked about a missing girl. "Alvin Ford," the man introduced himself. "I received information that you may have found my daughter, Isabella. She disappeared 2 years ago during a town festival in Stroudsburg." Brittany's heart raced. "Can you describe your daughter?" 6 years old now, curly brown hair, green eyes. She was wearing a blue dress with flowers when she disappeared, always carried a rag doll that her grandmother had made. The description coincided perfectly with Deborah's account. Brittany felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief for finally having a concrete clue, terror for the consequences that this would bring. "Mr. Ford, I need you to come to Scranton as soon as possible. But I need to warn you that the situation is complex." 3 hours later, Alvin Ford arrived at the apartment accompanied by his wife, Marilyn, a woman with eyes red from crying. The couple had spent 2 years living a private hell, distributing posters, offering rewards, following false leads that always led to the same place, nowhere. When they saw Ashley playing in the garden, Marilyn let out a cry that echoed throughout the building. "Isabella!" "My daughter." Ashley looked up, confused by the commotion. She looked at the woman who was running towards her, with tears streaming down her face, then at Deborah, who had been paralyzed at the door of the apartment. "Mommy," Ashley said, but she was not addressing Marilyn. Her eyes searched for Deborah, silently asking for an explanation for that surreal situation. Alvin approached slowly, studying every detail of Ashley's face. His hands trembled as he pulled a photo from his pocket. The same girl, 2 years younger, smiling next to a birthday cake. "It's her," he whispered, his voice choked. "It's our Isabella." But when he bent down to hug the girl, Ashley recoiled instinctively, hiding behind Deborah. The rejection was like a stab in the heart for the biological parents. "She doesn't remember us," Marilyn said, bursting into sobs. "Our own daughter doesn't remember us." Brittany intervened quickly, her professional training taking over. "It's normal in cases of trauma. Children develop protective mechanisms when they go through very stressful experiences." What followed were hours of devastating emotional confrontation. Alvin and Marilyn demanded to take Ashley immediately, arguing their legal rights as biological parents. Deborah flatly refused to let the girl go, claiming that she had become her daughter in every way that mattered. "You abandoned her at the fair," Deborah shouted in despair. "Where were you when she was lost and scared?" "We didn't abandon her," Alvin retorted angrily. "She disappeared during the confusion of the festival. We looked for her until we couldn't take it anymore." Ashley watched everything in silence, her big eyes absorbing every word laden with pain and accusation. When the discussion reached its peak, she ran to her room and locked the door, leaving all the adults in an embarrassing silence. It was Richard who suggested a pause. "Let's all calm down. What matters now is Ashley's well-being, not our feelings." During the temporary truce, Brittany spoke separately with each party involved. Alvin and Marilyn told how Isabella had been lost during a crowded town festival, how the family had fallen apart with guilt and despair, how they had spent all their savings hiring private detectives. She was a joyful child, Marilyn said, showing photos on her cell phone. Loved to sing, draw, play with the doll that my mother made for her. Deborah, in turn, described the 2 years taking care of Ashley, how the girl had arrived traumatized and gradually regained confidence, how they had created routines and traditions that had become sacred for both. "She calls me Mom," Deborah said repeatedly. "I'm the only mother she remembers having." Meanwhile, Ashley remained locked in her room, in total silence. When Brittany finally managed to convince her to open the door, she found the girl sitting on the floor, surrounded by all her drawings scattered around. "Ashley, can we talk?" Brittany asked gently. The girl nodded, but did not lift her eyes from the papers. "Why is everyone fighting over me?" The question was simple and devastating. Brittany sat on the floor next to her, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes adults get confused about what's best for children," she explained. "That man and that woman believe that you are their daughter who was lost a long time ago. But I'm not Isabella," Ashley said with conviction. "I'm Ashley. Deborah gave me that name." "And do you remember anything from before Deborah?" Ashley was silent for a long moment, as if searching through distant and hazy memories. "Sometimes I dream about things. A big house with lots of plants, a lady who made cookies, a man who taught me how to make kites. And how did you feel in those dreams?" "Happy," she admitted softly. "But then I wake up, and Deborah is here, and I feel happy too. Why can't I have two families?" The innocence of the question broke Brittany's heart. How to explain to a 6-year-old that the adult world didn't work that way? That night, a tense meeting took place at the local police station. Valerie had been called, along with a court officer, to mediate the situation that had become a complex legal dispute. Alvin and Marilyn had brought documents proving paternity, including medical records that confirmed Ashley's identity through a small scar on her left knee. "There is no doubt," declared the officer after examining the evidence. "The child is Isabella Ford. She must be returned immediately to her biological parents." Deborah broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, don't take her away from me. She's all I have left." Richard tried to intervene with legal arguments about temporary custody and psychological evaluations, but the law was clear. Biological parents had unquestionable rights, especially in cases of kidnapping, even if unintentional. "The transfer will take place tomorrow morning," announced the officer. "The child will go with her biological parents." When they returned to the apartment, they found Ashley sleeping on the sofa, exhausted by the emotional stress of the day. Deborah knelt next to her, stroking her hair with the delicacy of someone who knew that those might be her last moments together. "How am I going to explain it to her?" Deborah whispered. "We'll explain it together," Richard said, placing his hand on her shoulder. "And we'll fight so that she can continue to have contact with you." But even as he offered words of comfort, Richard knew that the chances were slim. The legal system was not usually generous with repentant kidnappers, even if their motivations were understandable. That night, none of the adults could sleep. Brittany made notes on possible legal appeals, Richard calculated costs of specialized lawyers, and Deborah simply watched Ashley sleep, memorizing every detail of her face. What none of them knew was that Ashley was also awake, just pretending to sleep. The girl had listened to the entire conversation at the police station through the partially open door, and now her 6-year-old mind was trying to process the fact that her life was about to change completely once again. And in her childish confusion, she began to formulate a plan that no adult could foresee. The dawn arrived laden with a tension that seemed to suffocate the small apartment. Ashley woke up before everyone else, as she had planned during her night of forced vigil. With silent movements that demonstrated a disturbing maturity for her 6 years, she gathered her most precious belongings in a small backpack, some favorite drawings, the rag doll that Deborah had sewn for her, and a notebook where she practiced mathematics with Richard. When Deborah woke up an hour later, she found only a note scribbled in childish handwriting on the pillow. "Gone to find my real family. I don't want anyone fighting anymore because of me. Love you, Mom, Deborah." Deborah's cry of despair echoed throughout the building, waking Richard and Brittany immediately. In a matter of minutes, the apartment was transformed into a crisis center, with everyone trying to understand how a 6-year-old had managed to leave unnoticed. "The door keys are in place," Richard observed, checking all the exits. "How did she get out?" Brittany examined the window of Ashley's room and discovered that the screen was loose. "She went down the fire escape," she said, pointing to the small marks on the external metal structure. Alvin and Marilyn, who had spent the night in a nearby hotel, arrived at the apartment at that moment, ready to pick up their daughter. Upon finding the chaos of the search, Marilyn panicked completely. "You lost our daughter again," she shouted, her voice failing between sobs. "2 years looking for her, and now she's run away." The accusation cut deep into everyone present. Richard immediately coordinated a systematic search, dividing the city into sectors and mobilizing his local contacts. Brittany called psychologist colleagues, asking for guidance on behavioral patterns of runaway children. Deborah, devastated by guilt, insisted on going out on the streets, shouting Ashley's name. 2 hours of intense search produced no results. Ashley had simply disappeared, as if the earth had swallowed her. Valerie was activated and brought an official search team, transforming Scranton into a rescue operation scenario. "A 6-year-old child can't have gone very far," insisted the sergeant in charge of the operation. "We'll find her before nightfall." But as the hours passed and the sun began to decline, hope gave way to despair. Ashley knew the city better than anyone imagined. During the months living with Deborah, she had explored every street, every alley, every possible hiding place. It was Brittany who had the first insight. She said in the note that she was going to look for her real family. What if she actually remembers something? What if there are clues that she hasn't shared with us? The possibility brought a new dimension to the search. Instead of looking for a lost child randomly, they began to investigate places that might have been significant to Ashley's fragmented memories. She talked about fishing with her grandpa, Deborah recalled, still trembling with anxiety. She always drew a man fishing in a river. Richard knew all the fishing spots in the area. He mobilized groups to check every river, every lake, every reservoir where a child might try to find someone fishing. But the search proved fruitless. Only local fishermen who didn't recognize Ashley's description. Meanwhile, in a distant part of Scranton, Ashley walked through the streets with a determination that masked her growing fear. Her small backpack weighed more with each block, and her feet began to hurt inside her worn sneakers. But she kept a clear objective in mind: find the house of flowers and Grandma Connie that appeared in her dreams. The problem was that the memories of a 4-year-old were not reliable maps. Every house with a flower garden seemed familiar. Every elderly lady she saw on the street could be her lost grandmother. Ashley knocked on at least 10 doors during the afternoon, always asking the same question. "Do you know Grandma Connie who makes kites?" The answers were always negative, but accompanied by growing concern. A child alone, visibly lost, drew attention in a small town like Scranton. Several people offered help, but Ashley had learned to distrust strangers during her months on the street with Deborah. As the afternoon wore on, hunger and fatigue began to take their toll. Ashley sat on a park bench, took out one of the cookies that Deborah always left stored for her, and for the first time since running away, began to cry. It was at that moment that an elderly woman approached. Connie Almeida, 72, had spent the afternoon tending to her small garden when she noticed the girl on the park bench in front of her house. Something in the child's posture, in the way she held a rag doll, awakened an old and painful memory. "Are you all right, dear?" Connie asked, approaching slowly. Ashley looked up, her eyes red with tears, and saw a lady with white hair, with gentle wrinkles around her eyes and hands that seemed to have cared for many children over the years. "I'm looking for my Grandma Connie," Ashley said, with the brutal honesty of childhood. "She lives in a house with lots of flowers and makes kites with my grandpa." Connie's world stopped. Her hands began to tremble, and she had to hold on to the back of the bench to avoid falling. She looked more closely at the girl's face, searching for characteristics that she had memorized through 2 years of dreams and nightmares. What's your name?" she asked, her voice barely able to come out. "Ashley, but I think I had another name before. People get confused about it." Connie knelt in front of the girl, her eyes examining every detail of the childish face. "Do you remember me, Isabella?" The name echoed in Ashley's mind, like a key unlocking a door closed for a long time. Fragments of memories began to connect. The smell of homemade cookies, gentle hands combing her hair, a soft voice singing lullabies. "Grandma?" she whispered, uncertain. The confirmation shattered all of Connie's emotional barriers. She hugged her lost granddaughter with a force that 2 years of longing had accumulated, crying tears that mixed joy and relief in proportions impossible to measure. "My little girl," she repeated between sobs, "my little Isabella, you've come home." Back in downtown Scranton, the search had intensified with the arrival of night. Police cars patrolled the streets, volunteers checked every commercial establishment, and a helicopter swept the area with powerful spotlights. Richard coordinated the operations from his car, his cell phone ringing constantly with negative reports. Deborah had entered a state of shock, being attended by paramedics after fainting during a panic attack. Brittany tried to maintain professional rationality, but her concern for the girl she had learned to love showed through in every tense gesture. "It's already 9 o'clock at night," Alvin said, his voice choked with fear. A 6-year-old child, alone in the dark. It was then that Valerie's phone rang, a call from the emergency center reporting that a lady had found a lost girl and was bringing her to the police station. The race to the police station was desperate. All those involved in the search converged on the small municipal building, where they found Connie sitting in a chair with Ashley sleeping in her lap. The scene was simultaneously a relief and a devastating complication. Deborah ran to hug Ashley, but the girl clung instinctively to the unknown lady. Alvin and Marilyn immediately recognized the mother-in-law they hadn't seen in 2 years, since family conflicts had divided the family. "Connie," Alvin said hesitantly. "Where have you been? We looked for you too." The revelation that followed completely changed the dynamics of the situation. Connie explained how she had moved to Scranton after Isabella's disappearance, how she had spent 2 years discreetly looking for her granddaughter, how conflicts with the girl's parents had made her keep her distance, even during the search. "I knew you would blame me," she said bitterly. "Isabella was in my care when she disappeared. You would never forgive me for that." What no one expected was Ashley's reaction when she finally woke up. Instead of running into the arms of any of the adults who were disputing her custody, she remained in Connie's lap, watching everyone with eyes that seemed to have aged years during that single day. "I remember now," she said with a disturbing clarity. "I remember all of you. But I also remember Mom Deborah taking care of me when I was scared, and then, with the cruel wisdom that only children possess, she asked a question that no adult was prepared to answer. Why can't we all be a big family? Why do I need to choose who to love?" Ashley's question echoed through the police station like an emotional bomb, leaving all the adults in embarrassing silence. The brutal innocence of the child had exposed the complexity of a situation that the legal system treated in simple terms of right and wrong, when reality was much more nebulous. Valerie, trying to regain control of the situation, suggested that everyone meet in the morning for a formal mediation, but Connie flatly refused to let Ashley leave her arms again. "She's staying with me tonight," declared the lady with a firmness that surprised everyone. I've lost my granddaughter once. I'm not going to risk losing her again." The tension escalated quickly. Alvin and Marilyn argued their rights as parents. Deborah pleaded for one more day with the girl, and Richard tried to find a legal solution that satisfied everyone. Brittany watched Ashley, noting how the child retreated more and more as the adults raised their voices. "Stop!" Ashley shouted finally, her voice small but charged with an authority that made everyone quiet down. "You're scaring me again." The reprimand of a 6-year-old child was devastating for all present. Connie immediately softened her tone, stroking her granddaughter's hair with gestures that awakened dormant memories. "You're right, my dear," she said. "Adults sometimes forget what's important." Valerie seized the moment of calm to establish a temporary arrangement. "Ashley will stay with Mrs. Almeida tonight, considering that she is the biological grandmother and clearly has emotional ties to the child. Tomorrow, everyone will meet with a family mediator to discuss a permanent arrangement." What followed was a painful farewell between Ashley and Deborah. The two hugged for long minutes, whispering promises that they would always love each other regardless of what happened. Richard promised Deborah that he would fight legally so that she could maintain contact with Ashley, but both knew that the chances were slim. In Connie's house, located on a quiet street surrounded by lush gardens, Ashley rediscovered fragments of her lost childhood. The room that had been hers was still preserved exactly as she had left it 2 years ago, with childish drawings glued to the walls and toys organized with care. "Grandma kept everything waiting for you to come back," Connie explained, watching Ashley explore the familiar space with growing fascination. During the simple dinner of soup and homemade bread, Ashley began to share memories that she had suppressed during the traumatic years. She spoke about Grandpa Joe, who had passed away when she was 5 years old, about the afternoons making kites in the yard, about the stories that Connie told before going to sleep. "Why didn't Mommy and Daddy ever come to visit me here?" she asked, touching an old family wound. Connie sighed deeply, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes adults can't agree on what's best for children. Your parents thought I was too old to take care of you. But you took good care of me," Ashley said with conviction. "I tried, but on the day you got lost, I failed. And your parents never forgave me for that." That night, Ashley slept in her childhood bed for the first time in 2 years, but her dreams were disturbed by faces of people she loved. Deborah crying, Richard worried, Brittany trying to protect her. She woke up several times, confused about where she was and who all these important people were in her life. Meanwhile, in the now empty apartment, Deborah spent the darkest night of her existence. Without Ashley to care for, without a purpose to stay sober, she faced demons that she had managed to keep under control for months. Richard and Brittany took turns staying with her, fearing that she might do something drastic. "I just wanted to be a good mother," she repeated between tears. "I just wanted to take care of a child like I should have taken care of my Mariana." Brittany, using all her professional training, tried to keep Deborah focused on reality. "You were a good mother to Ashley. For 2 years, you protected her and loved her when she needed it most. That's not going to change, regardless of what happens tomorrow." The next morning, the family mediation took place in the prosecutor's office, with all interested parties present. Alvin and Marilyn as biological parents, Connie as grandmother and current caregiver, Deborah as adoptive mother, and Richard as witness and financial support. Brittany participated as a specialized psychologist, representing Ashley's emotional interests. The mediator, Dr. Carl Roberts, an experienced man in complex family cases, listened to all parties before addressing the child who was at the center of all that storm. "Ashley," he said gently, "do you understand that everyone here loves you and wants to take care of you?" "I understand," she replied, sitting in Connie's lap, but looking at everyone around the table. "And do you understand that you need to live with a permanent family? You can't keep moving from house to house. Ashley nodded, but her next question shocked everyone. What if I don't want to live with any of them? The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Roberts leaned forward, intrigued by the unexpected answer. What do you mean by that? I want to live in a place where everyone can visit me. Where Mom Deborah can teach me how to cook, where Dad Alvin can tell me stories, where Mom Marilyn can comb my hair, where Grandma Connie can make kites with me, where Uncle Richard can teach me math, and where Aunt Brittany can talk to me when I'm sad. The childish proposal revealed a wisdom that no adult had considered. Ashley had realized that each person in her life offered something unique and valuable, and she didn't want to lose any of those connections. Dr. Roberts paused to consider the legal implications of the suggestion. That's unconventional, but not impossible. It was Connie who offered the practical solution. My house is big. It has empty rooms since Joe passed away. If everyone agrees, Ashley can live with me, but you can visit her whenever you want. You can even stay for a few days if necessary. The proposal brought hope to Deborah, who had assumed that she would never see Ashley again. Would you do that? Would you let me be part of her life? A child needs love, Connie replied simply, and you clearly love my granddaughter. It would be cruel to separate them completely. Alvin and Marilyn hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with an arrangement that did not give them exclusive custody. But as they looked at Ashley, seeing the hope grow in her eyes, they understood that forcing a total separation could traumatize her even further. What if we try it for a few months, Marilyn suggested hesitantly, to see how it works in practice? Dr. Roberts took the opportunity to formalize a temporary agreement. Ashley would live with Connie, but everyone else would have specific visitation rights. Deborah could visit her 3 times a week, Alvin and Marilyn on weekends, and Richard and Brittany whenever they wished. When the agreement was announced, Ashley smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't the perfect solution that any adult had imagined, but it was a solution that prioritized the child's emotional well-being over legal conventions. But as everyone left the prosecutor's office with cautious optimism, none of them noticed Valerie watching from afar, with an expression that mixed professional disapproval and something much more personal. The social worker had lost control of a case that she considered hers, and that had awakened motivations that went far beyond an interest in Ashley's well-being. That night, when Ashley slept peacefully in Connie's house, surrounded by visits from all the people she loved, Valerie made discreet calls to superiors, questioning the legality of the unusual arrangement and suggesting that a deeper investigation was necessary. What she didn't know was that her personal motivations were about to collide with a revelation that would completely change her perspective on the case. 3 weeks had passed since the unusual family agreement, and the routine established in Connie's house worked better than anyone had imagined. Ashley had flourished in that environment of multiple love, demonstrating an impressive emotional maturity in navigating between the different personalities and needs of everyone who loved her. Deborah visited on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, always bringing homemade cookies that she made especially for Ashley. She had found a job at a local bakery and maintained her sobriety with unwavering determination, knowing that any slip-up could compromise her visitation rights. Alvin and Marilyn came on Sundays, gradually rebuilding their bond with their daughter through games in the garden and stories about the family she had forgotten. Richard had become an almost daily presence, arriving after work to help Ashley with homework and listen to her increasingly complex mathematical discoveries. Brittany came twice a week, not only as a psychologist observing the child's development, but as an affectionate aunt who had found in the makeshift family something she didn't know she needed. Connie orchestrated everything with the wisdom of someone who had raised children and faced devastating losses. Her house had transformed into a vibrant family center, where different stories intertwined, creating a new narrative of love and belonging. But this fragile harmony was about to be tested in a devastating way. On a Thursday afternoon, Valerie Sanders appeared at Connie's house without prior notice, accompanied by 2 officers and carrying a court order that made the elderly woman's heart stop. "Mrs. Almeida," she said with professional coldness, "I need to remove Ashley immediately. We have received disturbing information about irregularities in the custody process." Connie felt her legs weaken. "What information?" "The agreement was approved by the family mediator." "The agreement was based on false information," Valerie replied, showing a folder full of documents. "We have discovered that you had problems with alcohol in the past, as did Deborah Santana. This calls into question your fitness to care for a child." The accusation was partially true. Connie had gone through a difficult period after the death of her husband 2 years before, when she turned to alcohol to cope with the pain. But that had been before Ashley's disappearance, and since then she had maintained absolute sobriety. "That was over 2 years ago," Connie protested. "I haven't had a drop since Isabella disappeared." "Unfortunately, the history of substance abuse in the family is concerning," Valerie continued relentlessly. "Furthermore, we question the suitability of an arrangement where a child is exposed to multiple conflicting authority figures." Ashley, who was playing in the yard, ran inside upon hearing raised voices. When she saw the uniforms and the tense expression of the adults, she immediately understood that something terrible was happening. "No!" she cried, running into Connie's arms. "I'm not going anywhere!" "This is my home." "Ashley, honey," Valerie said, trying to use a softer tone, "you're going to a temporary place while we resolve some issues. It's for your own good." "My own good is staying here," Ashley retorted with a determination that surprised the officers. "With my grandma, with my mom, Deborah, with everyone who loves me." What followed was a traumatic scene that none of those present would forget. Ashley clung to Connie with desperate force, screaming and crying while the officers tried to separate them gently. The elderly woman cried silently, whispering promises that everything would be all right, even knowing that she might be lying. It was in that chaotic moment that Deborah arrived for her scheduled visit. Upon seeing the scene, she panicked completely, physically trying to prevent them from taking Ashley. Her desperate reaction only reinforced Valerie's arguments about emotional instability. "You can't do this!" Deborah shouted. "She was happy. For the first time in years, we were all happy." Richard arrived minutes later, having received a desperate call from Connie. His attempt to intervene legally was blocked by the court order that Valerie carried, signed by a judge who did not know the details of the case. "This is temporary," Valerie insisted, although her expression suggested satisfaction with the result. "Ashley will be in a specialized shelter while we re-evaluate the whole situation." When they finally managed to separate Ashley from Connie, the girl was almost in a state of shock. Her last look at the house where she had rediscovered happiness was of pure betrayal. Once again, the adults had made decisions for her without truly considering her. In the official car, Ashley remained in total silence, refusing to answer any questions or accept any comfort. Valerie tried to justify her actions, explaining that she was protecting her from a potentially unstable environment, but the child ignored her completely. The temporary shelter was a clean and well-run institution, but completely devoid of the family warmth that Ashley had finally rediscovered. Sterile rooms, rigid routines, and professional caregivers replaced the loving chaos of Connie's house. On that first night in the shelter, Ashley refused to eat, to talk, or to participate in any activity. She sat on her bed, hugging the rag doll she had managed to bring, and crying silently until she fell asleep from exhaustion. Meanwhile, in the now empty house of Connie, an emergency meeting was taking place. Richard had summoned the best lawyer he could find, Dr. Henry Morales, a specialist in family law. Brittany analyzed the documents that Valerie had presented, looking for legal inconsistencies. Deborah oscillated between fury and total despair. There's something very wrong with this situation, Brittany said, examining the papers. Valerie acted too quickly, as if she were waiting for an opportunity to intervene. Dr. Morales agreed. This court order was obtained with partial information. If we can prove that it was based on distorted data or personal motivations, we can reverse it. It was Richard who asked the question that everyone was avoiding. What if we can't? What if Ashley is placed for permanent adoption? The silence that followed was devastating. Everyone had become attached to that extraordinary child, and the possibility of losing her definitively was unbearable. Connie, who had remained silent during the discussion, finally spoke. Valerie mentioned my problem with alcohol. How did she know that? I never told anyone. The observation caught Brittany's attention. You're right. That information is not in public records. Someone specifically investigated your past. But who would do that? Deborah asked. The answer came unexpectedly 2 days later, when Dr. Morales returned with information obtained through his contacts at City Hall. Valerie Sanders had lost custody of her own daughter 5 years ago, due to the alcoholism that had destroyed her marriage and initial career as a teacher. She's projecting her own pain onto this case, the lawyer explained. She sees in you the same flaws that made her lose her daughter, and she's determined to protect Ashley from repeating her personal history. The revelation completely changed the perspective on Valerie's motivations. It wasn't professional bad faith, but unresolved personal trauma that made her act with excessive severity in cases involving alcohol and unconventional families. Can we use this to our advantage? Richard asked. We can question her impartiality, Dr. Morales replied. But first we need evidence that her decisions were influenced by personal issues, not by legitimate concerns for the child's well-being. While the adults planned legal strategies, Ashley spent her 3rd day in the shelter in almost total silence. She had spoken only once, to ask the director when she could go home. The evasive answer had made her retreat even further. It was during the afternoon of that 3rd day that something unexpected happened. One of the caregivers, Mary Jones, noticed that Ashley was obsessively drawing on the paper they had given her. But instead of the colorful birds she used to draw, she was now creating dark figures, imprisoned behind bars. Ashley, Mary said gently, do you want to talk about your drawings? The girl looked up for the first time in 3 days, and what the caregiver saw there was heartbreaking. It was no longer the confident and intelligent child described in the reports, but a broken girl who had lost faith in the adults once again. They lied to me, Ashley said with a small voice, but charged with disillusionment. They said I could have a big family, that everyone could love me. But it was a lie. At that moment, Mary understood that she was witnessing not only the suffering of a child removed from a home, but the systematic destruction of a 6-year-old's ability to trust in the love of adults. The discovery about Valerie's past opened a new front in the legal battle, but also revealed a deeper layer of complexity in the case. Dr. Morales had gained access to records that showed how Valerie had lost custody of her daughter Sophia after a series of incidents related to alcoholism that culminated in severe neglect. Sophia had to be hospitalized for malnutrition, the lawyer explained at a tense meeting in the office. Valerie was so consumed by drinking that she forgot to feed her own daughter. The father got full custody and moved to another state. The information was devastating, but also offered an explanation for Valerie's seemingly irrational behavior. Brittany, with her background in psychology, recognized the classic patterns of unresolved trauma. She sees in our situation a distorted reflection of her own history, Brittany analyzed. Deborah with a history of alcoholism, Connie admitting past problems with drinking, a child in an irregular situation. For Valerie, we are the version of herself that she would have liked to have prevented. Richard, who had remained silent during the discussion, finally spoke up. Understanding her motivations doesn't change the fact that Ashley is suffering. It's been 5 days at the shelter. Indeed, the reports coming from the shelter were worrying. Ashley had stopped eating properly, refused to participate in group activities, and developed nightmares that made her wake up screaming during the early hours of the morning. The bright and resilient child was fragmenting before the caregiver's eyes. It was Mary Jones, the caregiver who had established a fragile bond with Ashley, who brought the most alarming news. "She's regressing," she reported in a call to Brittany. "She's started wetting the bed again, something she clearly hasn't done for years. And today, I found her trying to hide inside the closet in the room." The information made Brittany take action immediately. As a psychologist, she recognized the signs of severe trauma and knew that each additional day in the shelter could cause lasting psychological damage. "I need to see her today," she told Dr. Morales. "As a professional, I can request an emergency psychological evaluation." But when Brittany arrived at the shelter that afternoon, she found Valerie already there, talking to the director in a closed room. Through the glass door, she could see that the discussion was intense, with Valerie gesticulating emphatically while the director shook her head negatively. When the two came out of the room, the director, Mrs. Carter, seemed visibly disturbed. "Brittany," she said, "I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about Ashley." Valerie immediately interjected, "Dr. Carter does not have authorization to be here. The case is under my exclusive supervision." "Actually," Brittany replied calmly, "I have a court order for an emergency psychological evaluation. I'd like to see her now." What followed was a tense confrontation between the two women, each defending what she believed was best for Ashley. Valerie insisted that the child needed to adapt to her new reality, while Brittany argued that the signs of trauma were evident and dangerous. "The girl is manipulating the situation," Valerie declared. "Children do that when they want to go back to environments that they consider more permissive." "Permissive?" Brittany retorted, her voice rising involuntarily. "You're talking about a family that loved her unconditionally." It was at that moment that a small voice interrupted the discussion. "Aunt Brittany?" Ashley had appeared at the door, wearing a shelter pajama that was too big for her, her hair disheveled and eyes red from crying. The visual transformation of the child in the last 5 days was a shock to Brittany. "Hi, honey," Brittany said, crouching down and opening her arms. Ashley hesitated for a moment, looking nervously at Valerie, then ran to hug Brittany desperately. "I want to go home," she whispered. "Please, take me home." The desperate plea of the child touched even Valerie, who for a moment seemed to question her own convictions, but she quickly recomposed her professional mask. "Ashley needs to understand that her situation has changed," she said firmly. "She can't keep running away from reality." "What reality?" Ashley asked, pulling away slightly from Brittany to look directly at Valerie. "The reality where I was happy, or the reality where everyone leaves me?" The simple but devastating question exposed the cruelty of the situation. Brittany seized the moment to lead Ashley to a private room where they could talk in private. During the next 30 minutes, Brittany carefully documented Ashley's psychological state. The signs of trauma were undeniable: severe anxiety, behavioral regression, loss of appetite, sleep disturbances, and above all, a deep distrust in the adults that she had taken years to overcome. "Ashley," Brittany asked gently, "do you remember why you're here?" "Because the lady said my family wasn't real," Ashley replied, her voice small but clear. "That they couldn't take care of me right. And what do you think about that?" "I think she's lying. Just like Aunt Creusa used to lie when she said I was bad." Ashley's reference to the previous situation with Deborah showed how she was connecting her traumatic experiences. Adults always lie when they want kids to do things they don't want to. The observation was deeply disturbing for Brittany. In just 5 days, Ashley had regressed to the state of distrust that had taken months to overcome after leaving the streets with Deborah. When the evaluation ended, Brittany left determined to act. The psychological damage was evident, and each additional day could be irreversible. But as she tried to leave the shelter, she was intercepted by Valerie Sanders. "Dr. Huntington," said the social worker, "can I speak with you in private?" The two women went to the parking lot, where Valerie revealed a vulnerability she had kept hidden under her professional mask. "I know you think I'm cruel," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "but I've seen what happens when children are left with unstable families. I've lived it." "Valerie," Brittany said gently, "I understand you have personal experiences that influence your judgment, but Ashley isn't Sophia, and our family isn't your family from 5 years ago." The mention of her daughter's name completely disarmed Valerie. Tears began to stream down her face as years of guilt and regret came to the surface. "Sophia hates me," she confessed. "She's 15 now and refuses to talk to me. She says I destroyed her childhood, that she'll never forgive me." "And you think saving Ashley will make up for what happened to Sophia?" Valerie didn't answer, but her expression confirmed Brittany's intuition. The social worker was trying to rewrite her own history through Ashley's case, seeking a redemption that might never come. "Valerie," Brittany continued, "Sophia needs her mother trying to reconnect with her, not trying to save other children to compensate for the mistakes of the past." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Roberts, who brought news that would change everything again. The lawyer had discovered procedural irregularities in the order to remove Ashley and had obtained an emergency hearing for the next day. The judge who signed the order never had access to the family mediator's report, he explained. He relied only on the partial information provided by Valerie. The revelation meant there was a real chance to reverse the situation, but also exposed Valerie to possible professional consequences for misconduct. That night, as Ashley spent another traumatic night in the shelter, Valerie faced a crisis of conscience that kept her awake until dawn. For the first time in 5 years, she dialed the number she had memorized, but never had the courage to dial: Sophia's phone. The call lasted only 3 minutes, with Sophia listening in silence as her mother begged for forgiveness through tears. When she finally spoke, the teenager's words were cruel but honest. "Mom, you can't undo what you did to me by trying to control the lives of other children." It was this devastating conversation that finally opened Valerie's eyes to what she was doing. The next morning, when she arrived at the courthouse for the emergency hearing, she brought a decision that would surprise everyone. The emergency hearing began in a tense atmosphere, with everyone involved in the case gathered in the small courtroom in Scranton. Ashley had been brought from the shelter, but her appearance shocked everyone present. In just 6 days, the vibrant child had transformed into a faded version of herself, with deep dark circles under her eyes and a withdrawn posture that screamed trauma. Judge Marcelo Santos, an experienced man but clearly disturbed by the visible deterioration of the child, first heard Dr. Roberts's report on the procedural irregularities. The evidence was damning. The removal order had been based on partial and distorted information. "Ms. Sanders," said the judge sternly, "explain to me how an order of this magnitude was processed without me having access to the family mediator's report." Valerie stood up slowly, and to everyone's surprise did not try to defend herself or justify her actions. Instead, she did something no one expected. "Your Honor," she said in a clear but choked voice, "I formally request the removal of my name from this case. I have personal conflicts of interest that have compromised my professional judgment." An astonished silence filled the room. Richard and Brittany looked at each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Grandma Connie held Deborah's hand, both barely daring to hope that this meant what it seemed. "Conflicts of interest?" asked the judge, intrigued. "Yes, sir. I lost custody of my own daughter 5 years ago due to alcohol issues. When I saw the similarities in this case, I projected my own traumas and guilt, making decisions based on my personal past rather than the best interests of the child. The confession was courageous and devastating at the same time. Valerie was essentially ending her career as a social worker, but also freeing Ashley from her personal projections. Dr. Roberts immediately took advantage of the opening. Your Honor, in light of this confession and the evidence of severe trauma presented in Dr. Huntington's psychological report, we request the immediate revocation of the removal order. The judge carefully studied all the documents before addressing Ashley directly, who was sitting between Grandma Connie and Deborah, holding both of their hands. Ashley, he said gently, do you understand what's happening here? The girl nodded, her large eyes fixed on the judge's face. You're going to decide if I can go home. And where is home for you? At Grandma Connie's house, where everyone can visit me. Where Mom Deborah makes cookies with me, where Uncle Richard teaches me math, where Dad Alvin and Mom Marilyn tell stories, where Aunt Brittany talks to me when I'm sad. The answer visibly touched the judge, who had spent decades dealing with complex family cases, but had rarely seen a child articulate their wishes and needs so clearly. And do you feel safe with all these people? I feel very safe, Ashley replied with conviction. For the first time in my life, I had many people who loved me at the same time. The use of the past tense did not go unnoticed by anyone in the room. In just 6 days at the shelter, Ashley had begun to speak of her family as something that belonged to the past, an irreversible loss that she had to accept. The judge paused for a long time, clearly weighing the implications of his decision. Finally, he banged his gavel. Removal order revoked immediately. Ashley will return to the custody of Grandma Connie Almeida with the visitation arrangement established by the family mediator maintained in full. The burst of relief in the room was palpable. Deborah began to cry uncontrollably. Grandma Connie whispered prayers of gratitude, and Richard had to lean on the chair to avoid falling. But it was Ashley's reaction that touched everyone the most. She simply looked around the room, as if checking if this was real or just another cruel dream. "Can I go home now?" she asked in a small voice. "You can, my dear," replied the judge. "You can go home now." The trip back to Grandma Connie's house was emotionally intense. Ashley barely let go of Deborah's hand throughout the journey, as if fearing that the separation was just a temporary pause. Grandma Connie drove with tears in her eyes, still processing the miracle of having her granddaughter back. When they arrived at the family home, something extraordinary happened. Ashley stopped at the door, observing every detail as if she were seeing everything for the first time. The flower garden, the welcoming porch, the familiar sounds. Everything seemed more precious after almost losing it. "Grandma," she said finally, "can I plant some new flowers so that our house is even more beautiful?" The simple question represented much more than gardening. It was Ashley reclaiming her place, investing in the future of that home, demonstrating that she believed in the permanence of that makeshift family. In the weeks that followed, the family routine was gradually restored, but with a new awareness of the fragility of their happiness. Everyone involved had learned that love, however genuine, was not always enough to protect a child from the complexities of the legal system and the personal traumas of adults. Deborah, who had almost relapsed during the traumatic days of separation, intensified her participation in the support group and got a promotion at the bakery. Richard used the experience to reflect on his own patterns of control, becoming more aware of the emotional needs of the people around him. Brittany developed a special interest in cases of unconventional families, using the experience with Ashley to help other children in similar situations. Alvin and Marilyn, who had remained relatively silent during the crisis, realized that sharing Ashley did not diminish their love for her, but enriched it. But it was Grandma Connie who underwent the most profound transformation. The near loss of Ashley made her confront her own mortality and vulnerability. At 72, she began making plans to ensure that if something happened to her, Ashley would have legal and emotional protection assured. "I need to talk to you about something important," she said one afternoon, gathering the whole family in the living room. "I want to formalize our arrangement through a will and legal documents. If something happens to me, I want Ashley to have guarantees." The conversation was difficult, but necessary. Grandma Connie proposed a detailed plan, where, in the event of her incapacity or death, Ashley's custody would be transferred to Alvin and Marilyn, but with guaranteed visitation and participation rights for Deborah, Richard, and Brittany. "That way," she explained, "our girl will always have a big family, no matter what happens to me." During that conversation, Ashley was playing in the yard, seemingly oblivious to the adults' concerns. But in fact, she heard every word through the open window, and her intelligent mind processed the implications of that discussion. That night, when Grandma Connie went to say goodnight, she found Ashley awake, looking out the window at the stars. "Can't sleep, honey?" asked the grandmother. "Grandma," said Ashley without taking her eyes off the sky, "are you going to go away like Grandpa Joe did?" The question broke Grandma Connie's heart. "We all go away one day, my dear. But the love we have for each other never goes away. What if you go away before I grow up?" Grandma Connie sat on the bed next to her granddaughter, carefully choosing her words. "If that happens, you will still have a big family that loves you. Dad Alvin, Mom Marilyn, Mom Deborah, Uncle Richard, Aunt Brittany, everyone will take care of you. Promise." "I promise," said Grandma Connie, kissing the girl's forehead. "You will never be alone again." But while Ashley finally fell asleep, comforted by her grandmother's promise, Grandma Connie remained awake, confronting a reality she had tried to ignore. In recent months, she had felt increasing fatigue, small symptoms that she attributed to age, but that could be something more serious. The next morning, she made a decision that she kept secret. She scheduled a complete medical appointment, determined to find out if her fears were justified. If there was something wrong with her health, she wanted time to adequately prepare Ashley's future. What she didn't know was that this seemingly simple decision was about to trigger the biggest crisis her makeshift family had ever faced. The results of Grandma Connie's medical tests arrived on a cold June morning, when the family had finally found a comfortable rhythm in their unconventional routine. Dr. Ricardo Alves, an experienced cardiologist who had served the Pocono area for decades, could not hide the concern in his expression when Grandma Connie returned to the office to hear the results. "Connie," he said gravely, "the tests revealed significant heart failure. Your heart is working at only 40% of its normal capacity." The words echoed in the silent office like a sentence. Grandma Connie had suspected something was wrong. The constant fatigue, the shortness of breath when climbing stairs, the nights of interrupted sleep. But hearing the official diagnosis made her reality crumble. "How long?" she asked directly without mincing words. Dr. Alves hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "With medication and lifestyle changes, we may have a few years. But you need to understand that your condition will progressively deteriorate. Years or months? If you take care of yourself properly, probably 2 to 3 years. Without proper treatment, maybe 6 months. Grandma Connie absorbed the information in silence, her mind already working on the practical implications. Ashley was 6 years old. She would still need care for at least a decade. 3 years was better than 6 months, but still insufficient to see her granddaughter grow up and become independent. "I need time to organize things," she said finally. "Connie, with the right treatment, you can have a reasonable quality of life for a considerable time. Don't give up." But Grandma Connie was not thinking about giving up. She was thinking about Ashley, about how to protect the girl from another devastating trauma, about how to ensure that the child had stability even when she was no longer present. During the trip back home, Grandma Connie made a painful decision. She would not immediately tell anyone about the diagnosis. She first needed to establish legal and emotional guarantees for Ashley, create a structure that could support the child when the inevitable happened. That night, as Ashley slept peacefully in her room, Grandma Connie called Dr. Roberts, the lawyer who had helped during the crisis with Valerie. "Doctor," she said without preamble, "I need to update my will and formalize custody arrangements for my granddaughter. It's urgent." The following weeks became a silent race against time. Grandma Connie worked secretly with Dr. Roberts to establish a complex legal framework that would ensure that Ashley would never again experience bureaucratic uncertainties. Documents were prepared, establishing a gradual custody arrangement where Alvin and Marilyn would become the legal guardians, but with specific rights guaranteed for Deborah, Richard, and Brittany. Meanwhile, Grandma Connie maintained a facade of normalcy that began to take its physical toll. The effort to hide her deteriorating condition was accelerating the symptoms. Deborah was the first to notice. "Connie," she said one afternoon, after the elderly woman almost fainted while they were making cookies, "are you okay? You've seemed very tired lately." "It's just old age," Grandma Connie lied, but her visible pallor and labored breathing betrayed that something more serious was happening. It was Ashley who, with her keen perception, noticed the subtlest changes. The grandma who used to play in the garden now only watched from the porch. The woman who took long walks around town was now breathless, climbing the stairs at home. "Is Grandma sick?" she asked Deborah one morning, with the sincere concern that only children can express. Deborah, who had also noticed the changes but didn't know how to address them, tried to reassure the girl. "Sometimes people get more tired when they get older. It's normal." But Ashley wasn't convinced. Her experience with adults had taught her to recognize when they were hiding important truths. She began to observe Grandma Connie more closely, noticing how she took medications she hadn't taken before, how she paused to breathe after simple activities. The situation reached a critical point one Sunday afternoon when the whole family was gathered for their weekly lunch. Grandma Connie had insisted on preparing the meal alone, but in the middle of cooking she fainted in the kitchen. Richard, who was in the yard with Ashley, heard the noise of the fall and ran inside, finding Grandma Connie unconscious on the kitchen floor. The ensuing panic was intense. Ambulance called, rushed to the hospital, Ashley crying desperately without understanding what was happening. At the hospital, while Grandma Connie was examined by the doctors, the makeshift family faced their first real crisis. Ashley refused to leave the waiting room, insisting that she wanted to see her grandmother immediately. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked repeatedly to any adult who was nearby. "Is Grandma going to come home?" It was Dr. Alves who eventually came out to talk to the family, his serious expression confirming everyone's worst fears. "Connie's condition has deteriorated significantly," he explained. "Today's episode was caused by a severe arrhythmia. She's stable now, but what?" Brittany pressed, anticipating bad news. "She asked me to talk to you about her real condition. Connie has advanced heart failure. She was diagnosed a few weeks ago, but chose not to tell you." The ensuing silence was devastating. Deborah covered her face with her hands. Richard leaned against the wall. Alvin and Marilyn looked at each other with growing horror. But it was Ashley who asked the question everyone feared answering. "Does this mean Grandma's going to go away like Grandpa Joe?" Dr. Alves knelt down to be at the girl's level, carefully choosing his words. "Your grandmother is very sick, Ashley. The doctors will do everything they can to help her, but she may not be with us for much longer." Ashley's reaction was different from what everyone expected. Instead of crying or panicking, she became very quiet, processing the information with a disturbing maturity. "Can I see her?" she asked finally. When they entered the hospital room, they found Grandma Connie awake, but visibly frail, connected to monitors that recorded every irregular beat of her heart. Upon seeing Ashley, her eyes filled with tears. "Come here, my dear," she said, extending her arms. Ashley approached the bed and carefully climbed in next to her grandmother, nestling against her chest, as she did every night before bed. "Grandma," she said softly, "you didn't tell me you were sick. I didn't want to scare you, but I realized it anyway, and I was more scared because I didn't understand." The simple but profound observation made Grandma Connie realize that she had underestimated Ashley's ability to handle the truth. The girl had gone through enough trauma to develop resilience, and she deserved honesty, not condescending protection. "You're right," admitted Grandma Connie. "I should have told you. My heart isn't working well, and it might stop working completely." "When?" "We don't know. Maybe a few months, maybe a few years." Ashley was silent for a long moment, then asked a question that no one was prepared to hear. "If you go away, am I going to be alone again?" "Never," replied Grandma Connie with all the firmness she could muster. "You have Dad Alvin, Mom Marilyn, Mom Deborah, Uncle Richard, Aunt Brittany. You have a big family that will always take care of you." "Promise." "I promise," said Grandma Connie, but her voice trembled slightly. That night, while Ashley slept in the hospital room on a makeshift bed next to Grandma Connie, the adults gathered in the hallway for a conversation that none of them wanted to have. "We need to accelerate the legal arrangements," said Dr. Roberts, who had been called to the hospital. "If Grandma Connie becomes incapacitated before finalizing the documents, Ashley could end up in the system again." "How much time do we have?" asked Richard. "Connie may have a temporary recovery and return home for a few weeks or months, but her condition is terminal. We need to use that time wisely." The brutal reality of the situation settled upon them all. They had spent months building a makeshift family based on love and mutual choice, but now faced the possibility of losing it due to forces beyond their control. It was Deborah who expressed the fear that everyone shared. "What if we can't keep our family together after Grandma Connie is gone? What if things go back to how they were before, with everyone fighting over Ashley?" The question echoed in the silent hospital hallway, a grim reminder that love, however genuine, still needed to navigate the complexities of the law, bureaucracy, and human egos. Grandma Connie spent 4 days in the hospital, enough time for the medication to stabilize her heart rhythm and allow her to return home. But everyone knew that this was just a temporary pause in an inevitable deterioration. During those days, something extraordinary happened. The makeshift family came together in a way that none of them had experienced before. Deborah took over the practical care of the house, organizing medications and preparing nutritious meals. Richard used his resources to hire a private nurse who would visit Grandma Connie daily. Brittany coordinated with Dr. Alves a palliative care plan that would allow maximum comfort. Alvin and Marilyn took turns caring for Ashley when the other adults were busy with medical matters. Ashley, in turn, demonstrated a touching maturity. She helped Deborah in the kitchen, read stories to Grandma Connie when she was too tired to talk, and made colorful drawings that she pasted on the walls of her grandmother's room to brighten the atmosphere. "Grandma," she said one afternoon, showing a drawing of the whole family gathered in a flower garden, "when you go away, I'm going to plant new flowers for you, so you'll always be in our garden." The promise deeply touched Grandma Connie, who understood that Ashley was processing the situation in a healthy way, transforming the imminent pain into something beautiful and lasting. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Dr. Roberts brought the finalized documents for signature. The will was a complex document that guaranteed not only the legal custody of Ashley, but also established an educational fund managed by Richard and specific visitation rights for each member of the family. "Everything is here," he explained, spreading the papers on the living room table. "Alvin and Marilyn become the primary legal guardians, but Deborah has guaranteed visitation rights 3 times a week. Richard is responsible for education and financial matters, Brittany for psychological care when necessary." Grandma Connie carefully read each clause, making small adjustments that reflected her deep understanding of the needs of each person involved. There was even a section on the family traditions that should be maintained: the Sunday lunches, the homework sessions with Richard, the special outings with each pair of parents. "What if someone doesn't agree with this arrangement in the future?" asked Marilyn, expressing a concern that everyone shared. "That's why I included this clause," replied Dr. Roberts, pointing to a specific section. "Any change in the custody arrangement requires approval from all signatories. No one can make unilateral decisions about Ashley." The legal protection was comforting, but everyone knew that documents did not guarantee emotional harmony. Grandma Connie realized that she needed to do more than establish legal rules. She needed to create an emotional structure that would support the family after her departure. "I want us to have a family meeting," she announced. "All of us, including Ashley. We need to talk about how we're going to keep our family together." The meeting took place the following Sunday, in the living room, decorated with Ashley's drawings. Grandma Connie, although visibly frail, presided over the conversation with the gentle authority that had always characterized her family leadership. "My dear family," she began, looking at each face around the table, "you know that my time here is getting limited. But I want you to know that I'm not afraid to leave, because I know that Ashley will be surrounded by love." Ashley, sitting next to her grandmother, held her hand firmly. "Grandma, you don't need to worry. We all love each other." "I know you love each other now," replied Grandma Connie. "But love isn't always enough when people are sad or scared. I want you to make promises to each other." What followed was an improvised but deeply meaningful ceremony. Each adult made specific promises to Ashley and to the other members of the family. Deborah promised to maintain her sobriety and always put Ashley's well-being above her own needs. Richard promised never to use his financial power to control or manipulate family situations. Alvin and Marilyn promised never to exclude the other parents from important decisions about Ashley. Brittany promised to use her professional expertise to help the family navigate difficult moments, not to judge or criticize. But it was Ashley's promise that touched everyone present most deeply. "I promise to love all of you always, even when you fight sometimes. And I promise never to make you choose between loving me and loving each other." The simple but profound wisdom of the 6-year-old exposed something that the adults had not realized. Many of the previous conflicts arose when someone felt that they had to compete for Ashley's love. She was establishing a fundamental rule. Love was not a scarce resource that needed to be divided, but something that grew when shared. During the following weeks, Grandma Connie's condition gradually deteriorated, but relatively peacefully. Some days were better, allowing playtime in the garden and stories before bed. Others were more difficult, with Grandma Connie confined to bed, but still conscious and present. Ashley adapted to the fluctuations with impressive flexibility. On the good days, they were adventure partners exploring every corner of the garden. On the difficult days, she became a little nurse, bringing water, organizing pillows, singing the songs that Grandma Connie had taught her. It was during one of these difficult days that Grandma Connie made a revelation that would change Ashley's perspective on her entire history. "My dear," she said, with Ashley nestled next to her in bed, "I want to tell you something about when you disappeared 2 years ago." Ashley looked up, attentive. "I didn't just look for you because you were my granddaughter," continued Grandma Connie. "I looked for you because that day at the town festival, you had given me something very special." "What did I give you?" "A little flower that you had picked along the way. It was small and simple, but you said it was so I would always remember you when I was sad." Grandma Connie paused, gently touching Ashley's face. "I kept that flower pressed in my prayer book. For 2 years, whenever I felt desperate, I looked at it and remembered that you had thought of me when you gave it." Ashley absorbed the story in silence, processing the deeper meaning. "Grandma, when you go away, I'm going to give you another little flower for you to take with you." "What kind of flower?" Ashley thought carefully. "One that never wilts." one that is strong like our love. The promise came true one afternoon in September, when Ashley appeared in Grandma Connie's room carrying something she had made secretly at school. It was a colored paper flower, carefully constructed with petals of different colors, each color representing a member of the family. "This is our family flower," she explained, placing it carefully in her grandmother's hands. "The yellow center is you, because you're the son of our family. The petals are all of us around you." Grandma Connie examined each petal, seeing how Ashley had thought carefully about the choice of colors. Deborah was pink, symbolizing care and affection. Richard was blue, representing stability. Brittany was purple, symbolizing wisdom. Alvin was orange, representing energy. And Marilyn was green, symbolizing growth. "And this tiny little petal here in the middle?" asked Grandma Connie, noticing a minute petal of golden color. "That's me," said Ashley. "Tiny, but right in the middle of all of you." That night, Grandma Connie held the paper flower against her chest as she fell asleep, knowing that she had fulfilled her most important mission. Ashley was not only legally protected, she was emotionally prepared to keep her family together through love, not fear or need. In the following dawn, Grandma Connie did not wake up. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, holding the flower that represented everything she had managed to build in the last months of her life. When Ashley found her grandmother the next morning, she did not cry immediately. Instead, she noticed that Grandma Connie was still holding the paper flower and smiled through the tears that began to flow. "She took our family with her," she said to Deborah, who had rushed into the room upon hearing the unusual silence. "Now she'll always know we're together." The days following Grandma Connie's passing were the most challenging the makeshift family had faced. The funeral was a touching celebration of the life of a woman who had dedicated her last months to building bridges between people that fate had brought together in an unusual way. Ashley, wearing a light blue dress that Grandma Connie had chosen especially for her, remained strong throughout the ceremony, singing her grandmother's favorite song in a clear voice that moved everyone present. But it was after the funeral that the real challenges began. The house that had been the center of the family now seemed empty and echoing, full of memories but devoid of the warm presence that made it special. Ashley insisted on sleeping in her grandmother's room for the first few nights, surrounded by Grandma Connie's belongings as if she could preserve her essence through the objects. "She hasn't come back yet," Ashley said to Deborah one morning, looking out the window as if expecting to see Grandma Connie walking through the garden. "Sometimes I hear her voice calling me to have breakfast." Deborah, who struggled with her own waves of grief, understood that Ashley was processing the loss gradually, alternating between acceptance and denial in a way that was perfectly normal for a 6-year-old. The first real test of the family structure that Grandma Connie had established came 2 weeks after the funeral, when it was time to decide where Ashley would live permanently. Grandma Connie's house was legally in the hands of Alvin and Marilyn, but it had been the home that Ashley knew and loved. "She can continue living here," proposed Marilyn during a tense family meeting. "We can move here, keep everything as it was." But Alvin hesitated, expressing practical concerns that revealed deeper anxieties. "It's a big house with many responsibilities. And maybe it's better for Ashley to start in a new environment without so many memories of her grandmother." The suggestion caused the first serious division in the family since Grandma Connie's death. Deborah vehemently opposed the idea of moving Ashley from her environment, arguing that the child had already lost too many people. Richard supported Deborah, offering to cover the costs of maintaining the house. Brittany tried to mediate, suggesting that Ashley herself should have a voice in the decision. "Why are you deciding where I'm going to live without asking me?" asked Ashley, when she noticed the growing tension among the adults. "Grandma said I could always choose." The simple but direct observation made everyone stop and reconsider. They had fallen into the trap against which Grandma Connie had warned them, making decisions based on their own fears and needs instead of genuinely prioritizing Ashley's well-being. "You're right," admitted Alvin, crouching down to be at her level. "What do you want?" Ashley thought carefully before answering, demonstrating the maturity she had developed through her experiences. "I want to live in Grandma's house still because she's everywhere here. But I also want you not to be sad or worried because of that." The solution that emerged from this conversation was creative and comforting for everyone. Alvin and Marilyn would move into Grandma Connie's house, but each of the other parents would have a specific day of the week to sleep there as well, maintaining a constant presence in Ashley's life. The house would truly become a family home, where everyone had a place and responsibilities. During the transition period, something unexpected happened that tested again the strength of the family ties. Richard, who had kept it secret for months, revealed that his company was facing serious financial difficulties due to poorly calculated investments during his phase of saving Ashley and Deborah. "I spent too much time focused on our family," he explained at an emergency meeting. "I neglected the business. I may lose the company if I don't get a significant loan in the next few weeks." The revelation brought a new dimension of stress to the family. Richard had been the financial pillar that allowed many of the practical arrangements. The private nurse for Grandma Connie, Ashley's educational costs, even the apartment where Deborah had initially lived. "Does that mean you can't help us anymore?" asked Deborah, immediately worried about her own financial stability. "It means that maybe I need your help," replied Richard, admitting for the first time his financial vulnerability. What happened next surprised everyone, especially Richard. Instead of abandoning him during his crisis, the family came together to find solutions. Alvin, who had prospered in his own business, offered to lend the money that Richard needed. Deborah insisted on taking on more household responsibilities to reduce external costs. Brittany offered her professional services to the family free of charge. "We are a family," said Ashley simply when Richard tried to protest against so much generosity. Families help each other when someone is in trouble. The financial crisis, paradoxically, strengthened the family ties in a way that prosperity had never achieved. Richard learned to accept help instead of always being the provider, developing humility that improved all his relationships. But it was during the resolution of this crisis that an accidental discovery completely changed the perspective on the entire family story. Brittany, helping to organize Richard's financial papers, found old correspondence that revealed a connection that no one had suspected. "Richard," she said one morning, holding a yellowed letter, "did you know that Grandma Connie worked as a secretary at your company 15 years ago?" Richard stopped reading the documents he was examining. "That's impossible. I would remember an employee named Connie." "Connie Almeida," read Brittany from the letter. "She worked in the administrative department from 2008 to 2009. You signed her resignation letter." The revelation was shocking. Richard examined the letter, vaguely recognizing his own signature from years ago, but with no memory of the employee. In 2009, he was focused exclusively on expanding the business, treating employees as numbers on spreadsheets, not as people with personal stories. "Why did she leave?" he asked. Brittany continued reading. "To take care of her grandson who had lost his parents in an accident, a 2-year-old girl named Isabella." The silence that followed was absolute. Slowly, the pieces fell into place in everyone's mind. Grandma Connie had worked for Richard 15 years ago, when she took care of Ashley as a baby after the death of the girl's parents. She had left her job to dedicate herself entirely to raising her granddaughter. "That means," began Deborah, processing the implications. "It means it wasn't a coincidence," completed Richard, his voice choked with emotion. "Grandma Connie knew me when she decided to trust Ashley to our care. She knew what kind of man I was, even if I didn't remember her." The discovery brought a new perspective on the entire journey they had shared, Grandma Connie had not accepted the unusual family arrangement just because she loved Ashley. She had done it because she had known Richard for years and believed in his capacity for change and growth. "She planned everything," murmured Brittany, amazed. "From the first moment she met us, she was assessing us, testing us, building this family." Ashley, who had listened to the entire conversation, made an observation that deeply touched everyone present. "Grandma always said that some people come into our life by chance, but stay because we choose to love each other. She chose us even before we knew we needed each other." That night, the family gathered in the garden of the house that was now truly theirs, planting the flowers that Ashley had promised to honor Grandma Connie's memory. Each planted a different variety, creating a diverse but harmonious garden that perfectly symbolized what they had become. Different people who had chosen to grow together. As they worked in the soil under the soft light of dusk, Ashley began to sing the song that Grandma Connie used to hum while tending to her plants. One by one, the voices of the adults joined hers, creating an imperfect but sincere harmony that echoed through the neighborhood as a celebration of life, of love, and of the family they had built from improbable circumstances. But even in that moment of peace and connection, none of them imagined that they would still face one last challenge that would definitively test the strength of the bonds that Grandma Connie had helped to create. 6 months had passed since Grandma Connie's passing, and the family had found a sustainable rhythm in their new configuration. The house that once belonged only to the grandmother now pulsed with the energy of multiple generations. Alvin and Marilyn as primary residents, Deborah 3 nights a week, Richard 2 nights, and Brittany whenever her schedule allowed. Ashley, now 7 years old, navigated between these presences with an ease that impressed all visitors. But it was on a cold April morning that an official letter arrived, bringing news that no one had anticipated. The seal was from a law office in São Paulo, and the content made Alvin's heart freeze as he read the first lines. "It's a lawsuit," he announced during breakfast, his voice tense as he held the document. "Someone is contesting our custody of Ashley." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Deborah's coffee cup falling on the plate. Ashley, who was finishing her cereal, looked up with the concern that she had learned to recognize in moments of family crisis. "Who is contesting?" asked Marilyn, taking the letter from her husband's trembling hands. "Valerie Sanders," read Alvin, his voice filled with disbelief. "She claims that our family arrangement is inadequate and harmful to Ashley's development." The revelation was devastating. Valerie, who had been removed from the case months ago after admitting her personal conflicts, had returned with a new strategy. This time, she did not allege issues of alcoholism or neglect, but argued that a child could not thrive in an environment with multiple conflicting authority figures. "She says here," continued Alvin, reading the document, "that Ashley is being deprived of a stable and traditional home, exposed to emotional confusion that could cause long-term psychological damage." Brittany arrived at that moment for her morning visit and immediately noticed the tension in the air. When she was shown the letter, her professional expression quickly gave way to personal outrage. "This is absurd," she said, examining the legal arguments. "I have extensive documentation proving that Ashley is emotionally stable and academically above average for her age." But Dr. Roberts, contacted immediately, brought worrying news when he arrived in the late afternoon. Valerie managed to get the support of a children's rights organization in São Paulo. "They have considerable financial resources and arguments that may seem convincing to a judge who doesn't know our story." "What kind of arguments?" asked Richard, already mentally preparing for a costly legal battle. "They argue that Ashley is being treated as a shared possession among adults who satisfy their own emotional needs through her. They paint our arrangement as selfish and potentially traumatic." The distorted description of their loving family was like a slap in the face to everyone present. During the last year, They had built something unique and beautiful, based on genuine love and mutual sacrifice. To see it reduced to selfish motivations was deeply unfair. "And what is the alternative they propose?" asked Deborah, fearing the answer. "Adoption by a traditional family, preferably outside the region, so that Ashley can start a new life without the complications of the past." The possibility of losing Ashley to strangers, of seeing her torn from everything she knew and loved, was unacceptable to everyone, but what hurt the most was the suggestion that their complex but loving family was harmful to the child who had blossomed under their care. It was Ashley who broke the tense silence that followed. "They want to take me away again." All eyes turned to the girl, who had absorbed every word of the conversation with her precocious intelligence. Her expression was calm, but her eyes revealed a mature understanding of the gravity of the situation. "We're not going to let that happen," promised Alvin, crouching down to be at her level. "But what if the judge believes them?" asked Ashley. "What if he thinks you're not a real family?" The question touched the core of everyone's fear. They had built something outside of conventional patterns, something that worked perfectly for them, but that might seem irregular to external observers. "Then we're going to prove that we're a real family," said Brittany with determination. "We're going to show the judge exactly how our family works." What followed were intense weeks of preparation. Dr. Roberts coordinated a meticulous defense, collecting evidence of Ashley's well-being, excellent school reports, psychological evaluations that showed an emotionally healthy child, testimonies from teachers and neighbors about the family's stability. Brittany prepared a comprehensive psychological report, documenting not only Ashley's mental health, but also the unique family dynamics that had allowed the child to thrive after multiple traumas. Richard used his resources to hire the best family law attorney he could find, a man specializing in unconventional cases. Deborah, who had maintained absolute sobriety for over a year, obtained certifications from support groups and secured letters of recommendation from employers and co-workers. Each member of the family prepared to demonstrate that, despite the unusual structure, they offered something that a traditional family could not: multiplied love, not divided. But it was Ashley who insisted on actively participating in her own defense. "I want to talk to the judge," she declared one morning. "I want to tell him what our family is really like." The hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in May. The courtroom was full. In addition to the family, Ashley's teachers, neighbors, Mary Jones from the shelter, and even Dr. Alves, who had cared for Grandma Connie in her last months, had come. Valerie Sanders arrived accompanied by 2 lawyers and a child psychologist hired by the organization from São Paulo. Her presence brought back painful memories of the traumatic period in the shelter, but also served as a reminder of how far everyone had come since then. Judge Fernando Carvalho, a middle-aged man with a reputation for being strict but fair, first heard the arguments from the organization. The psychologist hired by them painted a bleak picture of emotional confusion, claiming that Ashley did not know who to turn to as an authority figure, that she was being overburdened with emotional responsibilities inappropriate for her age. "This child," she argued, "is being forced to navigate between conflicting loyalties, satisfying the emotional needs of multiple adults who use their love to justify an arrangement that serves their interests, not hers." When it was the defense's turn, Dr. Roberts presented a completely different narrative. He showed concrete evidence of Ashley's exceptional development, academically, emotionally, and socially. He presented testimonies from teachers describing a confident, empathetic, and academically superior child. Brittany was called as an expert witness and presented her detailed psychological evaluation. "Ashley is not confused about authority figures," she explained. "She perfectly understands that each adult in her life has a specific and complementary role. Far from being overburdened, she has developed exceptional emotional skills through exposure to multiple styles of love and care. One by one, each member of the family testified about their relationship with Ashley and with each other. Deborah spoke about her recovery and how caring for Ashley had given her purpose to maintain sobriety. Richard described how the girl had taught him humility and the importance of human connections over material success. Alvin and Marilyn explained how they had rediscovered the joy of being parents through Ashley, and how the arrangement allowed her to maintain connections with her history instead of erasing it. But it was when Ashley was called to speak that the atmosphere of the courtroom changed completely. "Ashley," said the judge gently, "do you understand why you're here?" "I understand," she replied clearly. "Some people think my family is strange because I have many parents instead of just two. And what do you think about that?" Ashley thought carefully before answering, demonstrating the maturity she had developed through her experiences. "I think they don't understand what it's like to have a big family. When I was little and alone, I was very scared because I didn't have anyone. Now I have many people, so I'll never be alone again. But isn't it confusing to have so many adults telling you what to do? It's not confusing because they talk to each other before telling me anything important. And because they all love me the same way, they just do different things with me." Ashley paused, looking at each member of her family before continuing. "Dad Alvin teaches me to be brave. Mom Marilyn teaches me to be kind. Mom Deborah teaches me to take care of people. Uncle Richard teaches me to be smart. Aunt Brittany teaches me to understand my feelings. And Grandma Connie taught me that families are made of love, not rules." The silence that followed was profound. Even the psychologist hired by the organization seemed touched by the child's eloquence and clarity. "Ashley," asked the judge finally, "if you could choose any type of family, which would you choose?" "I would choose exactly the family I have," she replied without hesitation. "Because they chose me first, when I needed them most, and now I choose them back." The judge paused for a long time, clearly moved by the testimony. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a conviction that reassured everyone present. "In 40 years presiding over family cases," he said, "I have rarely seen a child so articulate, confident, and emotionally healthy. If this is the result of a non-traditional family, then perhaps we need to reconsider our definitions of tradition." The decision was unanimous. The family arrangement would be maintained in full, with the judge praising the family for creating an innovative model of childcare based on love, communication, and shared responsibility. When they left the courtroom, the family embraced in a complex configuration that looked like a human knot of relief and gratitude. Ashley was in the center, surrounded by all those who had fought to protect her, not because they had to do it, but because they chose to do it. That night, gathered in the house that was now truly theirs, they planted a new tree in the garden, a small yellow Handranthus albus that Ashley had chosen. "So that when I grow up and have my own children," she explained, "I can tell them about the family that taught me that love grows when it is divided." As they worked in the spring, Aguinaldo reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them to that moment. It had begun as a controlling businessman trying to compensate for past guilts, and had become part of something much larger, a family that proved that sometimes the best things in life come when we are willing to abandon our plans and embrace possibilities that we never imagined. Deborah, who had found redemption through the love for a child she had not given birth to, now understood that being a mother was not about biology, but about the daily choice of putting another person's well-being above her own. Christiane had discovered that her professional skills were more valuable when tempered with personal love, and that helping a family had taught her more about human psychology than years of academic study. Aldides and Marilia had learned that finding a daughter did not mean losing her to others, but multiplying the joy through sharing. And Ashley, the child who had begun as a victim of tragic circumstances, had become the beating heart of a family that proved that love knows no conventional boundaries, that healing is possible, and that sometimes the strongest families are those that we choose to build together one day at a time, with patience, forgiveness, and unwavering faith in the transformative power of unconditional love. Under the stars that began to appear in the Pennsylvania sky, 6 people whom fate had brought together through pain and improbable circumstances celebrated a victory that was much greater than a court decision. They had proven that family is a verb, not a noun, something that is actively built through daily choices of love, forgiveness, and mutual commitment.